Good afternoon. Today is the 3rd of September and as promised it's time to answer some viewer questions. I've had a number of questions actually over the last couple of days on the channel, and it's time to go through them. I have actually had to do some research on some of them, and for this I shall be referring to the notes I've made in my secret mission document. So if my eyes kind of wander around all over the place, I have questions on one device here, and I have the answers to some of them on this particular piece of paper over here. So this might be quite a long video. I suppose I better get on with it. Let's start with Alan Simpson on the YouTube community page, and Alan asks, what is the most disappointing car you've ever driven? I know that some you expect to be poor, but have there been any that have either been poorer than you could ever imagined, or left you feeling cold when you expected a bit more? You could say there were a couple of answers to this, but one of them actually being the 2019 Volkswagen Golf Mark 7.5, which is bizarrely one of my most popular videos on the entire channel, and yet nobody who is a regular viewer really ever talks about it, and I find that quite surprising. The Golf doesn't really disappoint me or anything, and actually that is a very nice car, and the one that I filmed have done 700 miles and was about 2 months old, so about the same age as a lot of press cars people have, or even newer with lower mileage. So it wasn't really disappointing or anything. It just, Golfs are kind of, you know, that they are what they are. There's not an awful lot to say about them. It's a very good car, but, you know, I just personally would prefer to save my money a bit. The car that I think really was disappointing, but I didn't feature on my channel, this is going back well over 10 years. Actually, and there are two of them, and they have a connection. One of them was a 1999 Peugeot 306 1.8 Meridian, which I was told before I drove one of those, this is I think a final facelift one, so near the end of production on a T-plate, that, you know, they drove incredibly well and they were amazing. And I drove it and it had a horrible gear change, the dashboard plastics were nasty, and it didn't, even to me, particularly handle very well, so that was disappointing. I also drove a Citroen BX about the same kind of time, and of course, you know, probably the same kind of gear change in it. This was, again, a very late car in the BX production. It was a 1993 BX 1.9 TZD turbo, so top of the range turbo diesel model. And I drove it, and I was expecting this amazing sort of magic carpet ride, and it to be just, you know, revelation to drive, and it just kind of wasn't. It just felt a bit sort of plasticky and flimsy and very average, and the ride wasn't quite as smooth as I imagined it would be. The other thing was I could not, for the life of me, find the electric mirror controls in it, so, you know, that wasn't great. And yeah, you know, the suspension was a nice novelty, but I wasn't really sure what that particularly added to the car, because the ride didn't, to me, seem particularly good. It could just be that that car was terrible, a bit like, you know, the 306 was a bad example of them. But having driven cars with the R65 gearbox a lot, that, you know, Rover bought in from, you know, Peugeot co-development, and it felt very similar, the gearboxes in both of those. So I don't know. The only car I think possibly was disappointing, in that, you know, I thought it was worse than it was going to be, was the MG GS. I wouldn't say that's a bad car. It's actually quite a good car, particularly for the sort of money you can buy for one of those, and the fact that they did come with 5 and then later a 7-year warranty. It was just a fact of, I'd driven the brand new MG HS a couple of hours before filming the GS, and the one we had was in very good condition, but it was the mid-spec model rather than the top one. And so it just felt automatically inferior in every way. You just saw how much development had happened in the last couple of years between, you know, the introduction of one and the other. And that's probably the only one I can see. I mean, something like the City Rover that we featured recently, it wasn't disappointing because I'd already driven one and I knew what they were like. That was just hilarious. That wasn't disappointing. But yeah, the GS possibly, it was that one. The Golf, not really, because, you know, that's what they're sort of like, you know. Yes, anyway, on to the next question. Stanley Leopard, who I think is still my longest standing viewer of on the channel. He's been watching my stuff since, oh gosh, early 2019. Yes, a lot longer than most of you have been around, I think. He asks, have you ever been irrationally loyal to cars that you own? Well, which I mean, you pay good money to keep them on the road, even though you know it's not financially prudent. I'm talking more about cars that are unlikely to become classics anytime soon. Probably yes. That would be the 2004 Rover 45 1.4 Club SE that I used to own. And the time I had it, which was 2009 to 2012, that was the only car that I had. And I didn't pay an awful lot of money for it. I think it was £2,400. But it just needed so much doing to it. I mean, you know, I inherited some money, and I could have just bought another car, but I decided to hold on to it eventually because so many things were going wrong with it. I had the money to buy a new car, and so I did. And the Rover got traded in for some stupid price, but because it was a Rover and because it was nice and comfortable and everything, I just held on to it because I just did. And of course, I've got another Rover 45 now, so yeah, I hope the V6s are going to become classics at some point. But the normal ones at the moment, they're just not worth a lot of money. You know, 1.4s, 1.6s, things like that. Really nice ones, about £1,000, maybe 1,500 on an exceptional one. People are trying to ask stupid money for them, but it doesn't really work that well. So yeah, I think that's probably the best example of it. Next question from Hayden Saxby. Do you have a favourite car manufacturer, or do you not have favourites? Well, I've owned 8 Rovers, and so you could say that's a favourite manufacturer of mine, but I can't rationally tell you that they were the best car manufacturer in the world ever. That's simply just not true. In terms of other manufacturers, there are some I really don't like, and I'm not going to go into that now. Some of you will know which ones they are. But equally, there are a number of ones that I think are good, and some are just sort of average, you know. I'm not sure there is one particular brand that I think is better than all the others. I'm not sure about that. The car history that I've had, and a lot of you will have seen that on the channel, it's called How Many Cars Have I Owned 2020 edition, will know that I've gone around an awful lot of car brands, and I've not just stuck to one. So apart from Rover, and actually a lot of the reason why I've had so many Rovers is because they're quite cheap at the moment anyway. So yeah, so I think that answers the question. There's a second part to this as well, actually, and it says, if you could import any car from any country it was near impossible to buy in the UK, what would it be? I think probably I'd like to import a very, very late Proton Saga. We got that over in this country as the Proton 1.3 or 1.5, and they stopped importing that in this country in about 1995, and it was replaced by the Persona. That car actually had a facelift in 92, which meant that we called it the 1.3 MPI, 1.5 MPI, but in Malaysia that car lasted until I think it was 2008, and in the sort of mid-2000s that got a final facelift on it, and I really like the final facelift ones of those. I really don't know why, don't even ask. I saw them when I was in Malaysia in 2006 and 7, and there's no way that could ever have sold that new. I think it had no airbags and stuff, but I would quite like to import that. Maybe I'm more of an Ian Seabrook than I give myself credit for. Next question from Ilias Lamari. I do apologise if I get anybody's name wrong, including Ilias's name. Hello, very kind that you're holding a question and answer session again. Well, it's my pleasure, sir. Here in the Netherlands, the biggest expense of running a car in terms of running costs are road tax, insurance, and fuel. Well, you know, I know very well all about those, sir. Specifically for younger people, it's hard to afford a car if you only have a side job because of study. Cars that are cheapest to run need to be very lightweight and be a petrol car. The fuel type and weight of your car are the specifications the government uses to determine the cost of road tax. It's funny, really, that actually it's a bit like that over here, where insurers seem to favour cars that are really, really lightweight and slow, whereas in some ways maybe a heavier and faster car could be better in terms of, you know, crash worthiness or active safety. I don't know. I don't, you know, make the rules or anything, but I find it interesting that the Dutch and the British governments have similar rules in this. The fuel type and weight of your car are specifications the government uses to determine the road tax cost. So if you had to buy your first car for a budget of €1,000 today in 2020, it would have to be 800 kilograms or lighter. My gosh, why do you think that 800 kilograms or lighter would be the cheapest car to insure? Gosh, right. Petrol and no more than 1.3 litres, at least 15 years old. What would it be? Are there any cars out there that are a bit different, not so bland? Straight away, I thought of the Daihatsu Charade that we got over here, the final version, but was also sold as the Daihatsu Mira. That car was launched in 2003, so if you got a 2003 or 2004 model Mira, that had a 1 litre engine. I think it was 54 brake horsepower, and that car was under 800 kilograms. It was very well regarded in the day. I've not had a chance to try one. They're not very common over here anymore, but I did see one on the internet just today. I had a look, and there was one for sale in Surbiton, which is in southwest London, for £800. So that's presumably about €1,000 or less. So that's probably what I would go for. You know, I'm sort of thinking that actually having a couple of safety features in the car is not such a bad thing, even for a first one, and that has a couple of airbags in it. So that's probably the best compromise of all, I think. So David H asks, my question is, it's 2003 and you can order any cars from MG Rover. That's a very difficult question. What models, including colour and interior trim, would you choose? Well, one of them's remarkably easy. Be a Rover 75 Tourer 1.8 turbo Connoisseur SE in dark blue with a beige leather interior. I might even go for an automatic because that sort of suits the 75 very well. In terms of the other car, got to have a KV6 in there somewhere, so MG ZS 180 in dark green. I don't think they did a light coloured interior for the ZS's. I could be wrong about that. I think they just came as kind of one as a piece. That's just what you had. So it's 5-speed gearbox and 180 horsepower and a relatively light car. They handle very, very well. You'll probably be seeing a ZS actually quite soon on my channel. I have been offered one for review, which is very good. But I don't mean the SUV. I mean the you know, car based on a Road 45. I think that those would be my two choices. Jake from Wells Wheels asks, my question for your question and answer session is, if you could only have one car for the rest of your life, money and object, what would it be? One thing you've got to bear in mind is that if you choose one car for life, I don't mean, you know, one forever and, you know, you can't have anything else. I can only choose one car to run around in and no others at one point. It's going to have to be something quite sensible because I need to do my job, and you know, I think we're, you know, looking at possibly the, you know, running costs I have to pay for myself, and so there are two actually. The question's been answered before, and the answer I gave before would be a 2019 Seat Leon 1.5 Excellence VST model with a 150 horsepower engine. I don't know if I'd choose the manual or the auto. I think those actually have an electronic parking brake, so probably they've got to go for the automatic in those. That car is fantastic. I drove a 2016 model of those with 1.4 engine on my channel, and it's almost entirely faultless. I don't mean in terms of reliability, but in terms of what it can do, and the fact it's a better looking, slightly sharper driving, cheaper version of a Golf with probably slightly more rear space. I don't think you can go wrong with that. I'd be very happy with one of those. But if I really wanted to splash out a bit, the 1.5 ultimate SsangYong Corando petrol automatic would be lovely. That's, I think they're about the same price actually. The Seat Leon just been replaced. I don't know if I like the look of the new version. I think a lot of the people who like Seat are saying that as well. I'm not so keen on the look of the new model, so maybe the previous model, the one I drove, or the Corando. The Corando's lovely, and of course dark blue with a beige leather interior. I think on the Excellence trim set you can also get a leather interior. The Excellence Luxe, I think it's called. I don't know if you could have that in beige, so that might sell me towards the Corando. So Malcolm Woodgett asks, if you were going to buy a 1 litre car and you want to keep it, like a Skoda Fabia, or I imagine everything else like my old Toledo, would you go for the normally aspirated one, or would you go for the turbo version? There are, with 1 litre TSI engine, there are 4 different power outputs, 60, 75, 95 and 110. Sometimes they're called the 115 because, I think it's like 113 or something, but that's pretty similar. What I'm really asking is, are these small engines going to have the longevity in a naturally aspirated one, assuming they are serviced regularly? Does simplicity mean a longer life? Well, the thing about those engines, and this goes for all of them, and in regards to if we've got a turbo or not, is that they have a thing called a wet timing belt. So the timing belt in the engine is actually an internal one. It's not on the exterior of the car, as a lot of timing belts would be. So, my experience of them is the turbos are fine. It's more the wet timing belt you've got to actually pay attention to, and that just affects all of them. And, the best one of those really is the 110 horsepower version, or the 113 or 115 you want to call it. You can get that in most of them, the Fabia, Toledo, even the Up GTI, and that's one that I would go for. John Smith asks, are you doing a Mark II MG6 review? Well, I'd like to do a Mark II MG6 review, but they only sold the car for something like 18 months. It was between 2015 and 2016. I have driven one of those. I've driven the 2016 version, and they do feel different from the later models. There's all sorts of refinements that actually they have, and yeah, I'd love to do a facelift MG6 review. And it's a shame they don't sell the car here anymore, but that's just the way it goes. It's just a question of finding one, and they didn't sell many of them, and you've got to find somebody who's willing to actually let you borrow one. So I'd love to, but I don't know if I can get my hands on one or not. Joe Kyle asks, if this question hasn't been asked before, would you consider recommending a categorised car to a customer? That is one that's been written off, such as a Category S or Category C. I watch the Salvage Rebuilds UK channel, and you can see from their videos that they really make sure the cars they rebuild up to scratch, so it's in better condition than most others are on sale at a cheaper price. I understand there is a risk that the car may not be 100% due to previous damage, but would you ever recommend one that seemed alright if a customer wanted a type of car, but their budget can stretch to it? Sorry if it has been asked before. Well, it hasn't been asked before, and I'm very surprised actually that this hasn't been asked before. I think Rob and Chris from Salvage Rebuilds UK have a really, really good channel. They've actually got quite a good dynamic as well, in that Rob does a lot of the talking, and by his own admission, he does kind of waffle on, and I think people actually tune in just to maybe see that. I get the impression that might be the case, and they certainly build everything they do to a really, really high standard. They like to get rid of all the marks in the car and make sure it's one of the best examples on sale, and all the repairs they make are to a very, very high standard. I mean, if you wanted to buy a car off them, I think you'd be doing pretty well. The only thing is that not everybody who rebuilds written off cars, salvage cars, do it to the same kind of standard that they do, and that's a bit of a problem. You don't know that actually the car's been done to the same kind of standard that they have. I have a viewer who actually also buys salvage cars at an auction, and you know, he does them up too. And I know, again, he's very particular about the standard that he does them to, but you just got to be really, really careful about that. The other thing is that you're going to have that marker on the car forever. You can't remove that, it just stays there. So the car will always be worth less, it'll always be on there as a written off and repaired car. So I don't tend to recommend those to viewers, just as kind of have a sort of blanket policy, because it just gets a little bit too difficult to say yes or no to it, because you just don't know what's happened to it. Sometimes the reasons for writing off are really stupid. I drove the Grand Vitara on the channel recently that you know, IBI had supplied, and that car had stupidly superficial damage. The only damage on it, I think, was mainly it needed a new mirror, and there were a couple of scratches on the door. And I think something like that, it's not going to be a, you know, safety reason not to drive that. He put a new mirror on it, and that was fine. On Salvage Rebuilds UK, they had a Honda HRV that had the catalytic converter stolen, and that was the only issue with it. But it'd been written off that because it was obviously more expensive to put a new cat on it than it was more expensive to put the cat on than it was to write it off. You know, it's silly, but you've got to. It's like in all of these things, you've got to weigh it up quite carefully as to what you want to do. But you know, if you genuinely are buying one of these things from somebody who actually knows what they're doing, and you've seen the car rebuilt, which you can see on Salvage Rebuilds UK, then that's fine. And as long as you actually really take the time to consider whether or not that is going to be the best thing long term for you. Thomas Harrison Lord asks, what are your thoughts on the ongoing discussions to find a new buyer or investor for SsangYong? Why do you think Mahindra is looking to get out just with the lineup is at a much improved level? And secondly, what do you think has happened to the electric version of the Corando? I actually had to do some research about this. The electric Corando is actually due for launch in April, and that's from an article that was published in July, so it's not that long ago. But apparently it has a 190 brake horsepower engine, and well, not an engine, I mean electric motor, and a 61.5 kilowatt hour battery. The range is apparently about 200 miles. Now, in terms of the loss-making business, I think Mahindra has been making no money at all, or actually losing money on SsangYong for quite some time now. And, you know, the situation we're in the world at the moment means that people are having to make very difficult decisions about whether or not they are going to be able to continue to have their businesses at the same sort of size and run to the same standard as they are. So, although SsangYong sales in this country are increasing at the moment, much as you know, a lot of people are very negative about it, it's not enough really to sustain the company overall as a whole, just in our market. So there's going to be some changes, and Mahindra, who've owned them for quite a long time, I think it's about 10 years, they're keeping an eye on our business for the next 12 months for looking to cut costs and restructure. Now, their current stake in the business is about 75%, but they're looking to reduce that to below 50% in order to find an investor for it. And current favourites, and this is from last month, so it's quite current information, would be Geely. I mean, Geely seems to invest in everybody these days. BYD, they make those electric buses in London, and then a Californian company called HAAH Holdings. I don't know much about them, but I think the future of the company is relatively secure. I don't think it's a huge worry. I think they will be able to come back, and I think their sales are going to increase. I do hope so, anyway. Mr. Andy G, one of my regular viewers, asks, my question to you is, what old classic car would you like to see it be given a modern makeover, if any? I would quite like to see the current MG Motor UK do a version of the MG Midget, maybe an electric one. Thank you very much so much indeed, sir. Well, that's my pleasure, sir. I think I'd like to see a modern version of the MGB. Obviously, they did one effectively in 1993 when they launched the MG RV8, and they used a lot of MG B components in that. Obviously, you can't use MGB components anymore to make a modern car. It wouldn't pass for legislation or anything. I think MG do need to make a sports car, an electric one, and they've been hinting that they will for some time. And even midget's probably a little bit small. Like, you can make a larger one. I think the B would be the ideal one to you know, inspire a new electric car. I couldn't agree with Mr. G more, really. Oliver Mel asks, what's the best car for under £5,000 but is reasonable to run and insure, has a reasonable amount of poke, at least 140 brake horsepower, it is refined and reliable enough to commute 50 miles a day? Now, we don't talk about diesels on this channel, so we won't be talking about diesel cars within this particular thing. But this is the kind of question I get asked all the time. That's a typical budget for a client that I would have. And the most important thing really is actually kind of what's out there, what's the service history like, and what sort of condition is the car in. So me generally just to say to somebody, oh, you need to buy one of these, is actually a bit of a silly one, because it could be something that's a slightly different type of car, but in much better condition within the local area for, you know, the same sort of money. So it's not a typical answer that I give. It does depend on what's out there, but assuming you can find one of these, and I did look and see that they are available for the right kind of price, would be a 2010 to 11 Skoda Octavia 1.8 TSI Elegance. The Octavia is generally a pretty reliable car. That engine's been in a lot of Volkswagen Group products over the years, and it generates in that application 160 horsepower. The running costs on that are quite reasonable. Octavias are known for being quite reliable. Yes, I think if that is actually a car that's available in good condition, then that would be an option. Now, this is a question that's interesting. The Driveway Kid Canic TDK asks, what is your opinion about Bangonomics if you aren't driving much on the motorway? I know Matt from Furious Driving isn't so kind on Bangonomics. Yes, he tried it for a bit, it didn't work for him. But other people like Hubnut do it all the time. Well, I don't think Ian Seabrook's really perhaps a good example of necessarily what to do if you don't want to be fixing your car constantly. He does what he wants to do. I'm considering buying a car for £500 or less for around town. I believe in recycling, want to keep the old ones on the road as long as possible. What car do you recommend? Far too many electronic devices in cars now, but the old cars I'm still able to fix myself. Well, buying a car for less than £500 carries an awful amount of risk. In fact, buying any second-hand car carries an awful lot of risk. And some of the cars we featured on No Budget Reviews recently have been pretty terrible. I won't mention any particular cars, but I think you know what I'm talking about when, you know, you think the cars, for whatever it's been paid for, really wasn't, really wasn't up to scratch. And if you are willing to do a lot of work yourself, you have the mechanical knowledge. Obviously, someone like Mr. Coleman does, and he bought a car for £50 recently. Then, you know, you're probably not going to be a typical sort of client that I would have at all, because, you know, most people I work with don't want to spend ages fixing a car. They don't have the time, they don't have the experience, and they don't want to spend more money on a car they try to save money on beforehand. You know, that's not something they want to do. However, you know, if you really do want to delve into the world of sub-£500 cars, and I have owned plenty of sub-£500 cars myself, then you could do a lot worse than a Rover R8. I bought one for less than £500. It wasn't in the best condition, but it was absolutely fine for daily duties during the first few months of the pandemic. Fine for did sort of 15-minute motorway journeys, no problem. Went to the shops, no problem. I actually drove that car all the way back from Peterborough, and again it was fine. We had to get the front brakes and change and do some other things, but I sold it to a chap from the West Midlands and he was fine with it. He'd had loads of them before. I think probably that's the one I would say I'd recommend. You know, there's spares around for major service parts anyway. Some of the body panels, interior trim are a bit more difficult to get hold of, but you know, you can't go far wrong with something like that, as long as you look over it properly, because like any old car, it's going to have rust and it's going to have problems. You can't get away from things like that. But yeah, I hope that's answered your question. We must be coming to near the end of the video, because it's time for Trabelli's question. These are always entertaining. I think I've done 4 of these in a row that are on the same kind of theme, and you know, once we get into this, you'll understand why these are so entertaining. It's 1984. Fresh from a victory in Argentina, Britain is on a high alert. Intelligence reports are coming in of an Argentinian nationalist terrorist group operating in the UK. An undercover agent has managed to get hold of their plans to blow up the Grand Hotel in Brighton, where the members of the Conservative Party conference will be staying. Yes, we all know about that. They've managed to bribe a crooked colonel and have managed to steal some explosives from the Vauxhall barracks in Glasgow, and are heading towards London in a high-powered Porsche 911 Turbo of a 930 series at very high speeds. Well, you know, if he doesn't actually end up in a massive tailspin and kill himself, then, you know, he might be all right. Police forces in Scotland in a Rover ST1 3500 try to chase him. They fail. The engine overheated. Northumbria police try a BMW 525i. They fail. The gearbox failed. West Yorkshire police try in a Granada 2.8. They fail. The clutch burned out. Oh, yeah, we know all about that. You're waiting for him at Leicester Forest East Services. Question: which car of the time, 1984, would you use to chase them? It has to be high powered to keep up with the Porsche. I think actually we're going to have to go with a 1984 Aston Martin V8. That would be the Series 4 variety. I think they're called Oscar India. That probably, as long as, you know, you're only going to Milton Keynes, which it says here, it's not too far from Leicester Forest East to Milton Keynes. Hopefully the fuel, you don't have enough fuel, but that would be nice enough. I mean, if it's good enough for Timothy Dalton and Living Daylights, I'm sure it's good enough for me. When you finally catch them in Milton Keynes, you get information over the radio that a crooked colonel is trying to escape the country in a private plane at Farnborough Airport from his house in Frome. Yes, he's already on the A303. Well, Frome's actually quite a distance from the A303, so that's going to be quite something to catch up. Question: your car that you chose is written off. Well, yeah, just like in Living Daylights, of course. But there are 2 unmarked squad cars. One is an A-Reg Cavalier Mark III. You know, it can't be a Mark III. It didn't exist till 88. I'm sorry, sir. That's a Mark II. 1.6 GL, and one of the others is a Sierra 2-litre GL A-Reg. I think that's a Pinto engine in that, as far as I remember. Which one of those would you choose to catch this traitor at the airport? I'm going to go with the Sierra. It's probably a little bit faster. That's a Type 9 gearbox in there that Mr. Coleman quite likes. Pinto engines are pretty reliable. I'd have to watch the handling in the Sierra. But yeah, I think probably that's going to be the only thing. It depends. I don't know what he's driving to get to Farnborough Airport, but yes, I think those are the 2 we're going to go with. Final question is from Richard Howlett. Is the rise of electric cars in Erexit? I think he means unstoppable. I know someone who's buying a Nissan Leaf, has to park on a road and doesn't know how she's going to charge it, but wants to do a bit for the environment. Where the metals of the battery comes from must be an issue. Sky News ran a piece on the Congo about 7-year-olds going into the hellhole mines to dig out these precious metals. How many charges will the batteries last for? Fast charging them does no good in the long term. I racked up an impromptu 400 miles the other week when I wasn't needed to work. Tried doing that in an electric car. I think the person to speak to really who is most experienced in terms of actually long-term ownership of electric cars is Mr. Jackson, who owns the MG SUV, which is by far the most popular episode of True Jacket Reviews on my entire channel. He's had electric cars since 2016, I think it is, so 4 years, and he's on his 2nd one now. And you just get into the habit of actually charging them when you need to charge them, and, you know, working out using an app or something like that where you actually need to where you need to be. I know that on Adrian Will's channel, his terrible WeGo Life electric car hasn't worked out very well for him, but a lot of other cars sort of are. And you know, you look at the older Leafs and things like that, and a lot of them have only got maybe like a 5 to 10% drop in electric capacity. I think actually the batteries last longer than we give them credit for. In terms of the mining and things like that, well, you know, it's just one of the things that sort of happens, and it's not very good. I'm not saying you need to choose an electric car for your next car. We know that, you know, oil and fossil fuels and everything like that have their own disadvantages too. I think there are advantages and disadvantages both to fossil fuel and electric cars, and you know, they're still both very much on sale at the moment. I haven't chosen to buy an electric car yet for our own use. That's not because of environmental capability, that's just because really they're not quite at a price point from my point of view that I would consider getting one quite now. They're almost there. You know, the yellow ZSEV is very close. But in terms of the sort of charging issue, well, you just have to get used to charging it at you know, a charging point near where you live or something. That's all I can say. There's really arguments for and against, and I don't think you know, this particular debate is going to go away anytime soon. I think we're going to be talking about this for some time to come. Yes. So there we are, an awful lot of questions, an awful lot of detail, and I hope you enjoyed all of it. Please don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos. Got another one coming up tomorrow as usual, and I hope you enjoy that. Don't forget to like this video, to leave a comment below, and visit my Facebook page, facebook.com/Lloyd Vehicle Consulting, and also instagram.com/Lloyd_vehicle_consulting. Thank you.